Enhancements webinar series. Today's session is on BMC Helix Discovery. Learn about Discovery Visual Query Builder. Today's presenter is Andy McCall, our Senior Director for Product Development. Most of you have probably worked with him before or collaborated. Before we get started, just a couple of reminders. There is the Q&A section of Zoom that you'll find at the bottom. We are going to remain with all participants muted until the end, just because we've got a lot to cover and some demos. So please put your questions, if you have any, during the presentation and the demo into the Q&A, and then we'll have roughly 15 or 20 minutes at the end where we'll take some live questions and also any questions that haven't been answered. Roughly the demo is going to take around 15-20 minutes, so I think maximum, Andy, correct me if I'm wrong, around 30 or so minutes, but there will definitely be plenty of time for live questions. I don't know if I've covered everything. Yeah,
you're absolutely fine.
Fantastic. The other point is, because this is an interactive session and we're recording live, if you do ask questions, do be mindful that your name may pop up. We do share this on social media platforms, so this will go to YouTube after, and also our community page. So just take a few minutes or so to read this statement. And then we'll get started. So Andy, if I can hand over to you to introduce yourself and get started.
Certainly. Thank you very much, Sam. It's nice to be in front of all of you today. As she said, I've been working with Discovery for quite some time now and probably had a chance to cross paths with many of you. And if I haven't yet, then I look forward to meeting you in the future. I'm responsible for the product development side of the Helix Discovery product. Today I'm going to be talking about a new feature that we're very proud of that has arrived in on-premise version 24.1 and just ahead of that in our SaaS versions of Helix Discovery, and that feature is called the Visual Query Builder. So today we're going to be mostly running a demo. There's going to be very little PowerPoint. I'm going to open up by talking a little bit about what the Visual Query Builder is, why we built it, and kind of who it's aimed at. Then we'll jump into a demo where I will take you through a worked example. Clearly, there are many ways that you can use a Visual Query Builder. I'm going to take you through one worked example where I build up through various stages of constructing a slightly more complex graph query as an indication of the kind of capabilities you have at your disposal now, and hopefully can make good use of in your environments. At the end of that, I'll give you a little hint about some of the enhancements to this feature that are coming in the upcoming SaaS versions and on-premise releases, and then we'll switch back to a Q&A session at the end. So that's largely what we're going to be talking about today. So what is the Visual Query Builder? Why did we build it? Who is it for? Well, clearly Discovery as a product can gather a large amount of really interesting and useful data for you. You can consume that data in a variety of ways. People build service models, they write reports, they extract data out, they navigate around the UI in order to get data. But what we came to realize is that we catered for two ends of the spectrum in terms of level of use of the product, level of experience of the product. There are some useful capabilities that everyone uses when they get started, in the sense that you open the UI and you'll have handy summaries of all of the hosts you've got, all of the software instances, little click-throughs into lists of node kinds that people use as a quick way to navigate around the system. As many of you will know, search is extremely powerful within Helix Discovery. So in the top right-hand side, you can search for any string and get very quickly get results from all over the Discovery data store. And we ship with a variety of out-of-the-box reports that people use. So if you're relatively new to the product, that's typically the way that we anticipate customers would consume data. On the other end of the spectrum, we have a very powerful query language that is documented in our user-facing documentation. There'll be a link to that documentation later if you're interested. But there are several users who have invested an amount of time to not only understand the Discovery data model quite deeply, but also understand the powers of the query language, which is extremely flexible, capable. It's almost a programming language, effectively. It's quite capable. But the level of effort required to reach that level of skill is quite high. So there's kind of we cater for people who start at the beginning of the process, and we cater for people who have invested a lot of time in understanding the product and its capabilities, but there's a bit of a gap in the middle for the folks who want to do more than the basic stuff, but haven't yet got the time or will never have the time to understand the query language. And that's where the Visual Query Builder is intended to, that's the gap that the Visual Query Builder is intended to fill. As its name says, it's a visual approach to building queries. Now, the data in Discovery is a graph. So you'll be unsurprised to see that the query that we construct and the visual representation of that query is graph in nature. And it provides what we think is a pretty intuitive way to create quite complex queries into the data and control what data you see and also how it's reported and so on. So without further ado, my next step is to transition over to running a demo. I'm going to switch to share my browser and we'll take it from there. If I could get confirmation from the BMC folks on the team that share has transitioned to the browser.
Yes, we are. We're good.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So those of you who use the BMC Discovery product will be very familiar with this UI. I'm on the Explore data page at present. And just as a brief reminder, these are the things that I was alluding to earlier in my introduction. So there's quick click-throughs to hosts, for example. There are 433 hosts in this particular instance of Discovery. I'd like you to remember the number 433 because as I go through building up the query, I'm going to start with a list of 433 hosts, and that number will go down over time as I add more conditions to my filter. So that's the number we'll start with, 433. I mentioned that we have a whole bunch of out-of-the-box reports, and some of them are listed here, and you can see a whole range of them. There are also reports that are contextual to nodes. So this isn't the complete list. And if you are interested in what kind of out-of-the-box reports we have, those are included in the documentation. And lastly, I said you can do a quick search. So you can. So I'm going to search for the word Tomcat in the top right-hand side. Again, I have an ulterior motive here because I'm going to be using Tomcat later. But you can see these are it's very quickly found quite a lot of hits for the word Tomcat all over the place. The most relevant ones being around software instances and so on, which shouldn't be a surprise. But you can see that down here, there's a whole bunch of data all over the place. Now, for those of you who use query, when you go to the Explore Query page before 24.1, you wouldn't have landed in this nice visual query page. You would have, in fact, landed here. So this allows you to construct search queries using that query language, and many of you will be used to using this. But now, if you are a new user to the product, the default is the visual query tab. It remembers where the product remembers what you use. So if you've switched to using generic query, the next time you go to Explore Query, it should remember that you're on the generic query page rather than visual query and vice versa. So here we are. Here is the canvas upon which I'm going to be building a query using the Visual Query Builder. And there are a few affordances in this UI for things that I should do. Currently, it's empty. And it tells me I should probably suggest a starting node, add a starting node. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to click here, and I'm going to add a starting node. Now, what we get is a slide out that allows me to select nodes. You'll notice a few things here. One is that there's a nice selection of commonly used node kinds. If you're eagle-eyed, you'll notice that this is exactly the same list of node kinds that appear in the quick links page on the dashboard. And that's no accident. That's a curated set of nodes that we believe are the most common that you might want to start with. You can also see that I can explore those by category instead. I can begin to see all of those nodes across the entire system broken down by categories. And these categories you will also be relatively familiar with. These reflect the kind of categories you see elsewhere in the product around cloud and container orchestration, hosts and containers, software and databases, and so on. And I could just search for any kind. But I'm going to start with host. So I'm going to click on host here. You may notice that here, I've been using this product before I got here. So I've already used some of these node kinds in my past, and the system remembers the most commonly used ones. I think the last 5, I think I remembered, I'm not entirely sure, but I'm going to select hosts. I'm going to apply that, and then I'm going to run that query. All I've said is hosts. I've added no conditions to that. And hopefully I should pop out with 433 hosts. Let's see, drum roll. Yes, we've got 433 hosts are returned. So that's a very boring query. I've just selected hosts. Okay, that's no different to clicking through to the list of hosts. But what I'd like to do now is reduce that list. I'd like to filter it down. The first filter I'm going to do is my problem today is I need to find, for whatever reason, I need to find hosts that are Windows hosts running the Windows operating system that have Tomcat running on them. And I'm going to start with the Windows bit. So you'll notice a few icons around this host node view in here. And if I select on the filter icon, I can get to add some filters to the list of hosts that I've got. I would like to filter down to the OS type. I have a variety of operators I can perform on those fields, but I would like to find one where the OS type is, and then I'm presented with a drop down that shows me a list of all of the actual values that exist in the data I'm looking at. And you can see actually there are 134 Windows hosts there. Here it says. So I'm going to click on Windows. Before I press apply, I want to draw your attention to the fact that much like you have with the existing query builder, you can decide whether these conditions, all of them are true, any of them are true, or none of them are true. So you can have very precise control over how these conditions are matching. But for the moment, I'd just like to look at OS Windows hosts. Once I've added that criteria, we show the filtering that's present on that node kind in the view. So notice that this will build up a little bit over time. But if I run that query now, what do we find? 134 are hosts, and you can look here that they're all Windows. So we started at 433. I've now added a filter that says I would like to limit that to just the ones where the OS type is Windows, and I've now got down to 134. So let's take it a little bit further. You can see that there's a pen icon here, which is the ability to edit. If I edit this now, we've already got the OS type filter. I'm going to add another one. I'm going to add another condition here. The condition I have arbitrarily chosen is I'd like to find Windows hosts where the amount of RAM they've got is minuscule and is in fact less than 1024. So there shouldn't be that many of those hosts, I hope, in this data, but let's have a look. So the first thing to point out is now this view here has grown the fact that it's filtering by OS type as Windows and the logical RAM is less than 1024. We're hoping to summarize this so you can quickly see what conditions are applied at every point in the graph. If I run that query, what do I have left? So in this data, I have 3 hosts that have less than 1024 RAM. So that's pretty small. But so actually, I got that wrong. I didn't want it to be less than. I think it should be greater than. So let's go in and edit that condition again. And I'll change the operator from less than to greater than. Hopefully, we'll find more hosts there. That makes me do that. Makes you know I'm doing it live. My internet connection is unstable, my system is telling me. That's possibly my kids are beginning to watch Netflix or something like that. We'll see whether that's true. But you'll see now that I've got 131 hosts. So I flipped it around. The first time I found 3 that were less than 1024, and now I flipped it around and I've got 131 where it's greater. Excellent. This is all fairly straightforward. But this isn't a graph condition, really. This is a single filter on a single node kind. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to extend my visual query, and I'm going to add a related node kind. So here I am now saying I'm presented with a dialog which allows me to choose what node kind do I want to select. This is the same quick links list of node kinds, but it's now filtered down to only those node kinds that are going to be related to hosts. So the quick links has been filtered down. We've lost a few things, and now it's just the kind of nodes that we would potentially get relationships from hosts to. And I want to choose software instances. So I'm going to type software instance and apply that. Okay. So this is now saying I want to find all hosts that have software instances related to them. I want to stop and look at this dialog here. So you'll see that here it says any relationship. So I am saying that I want to find hosts where the OS type is Windows and the logical RAM is greater than 1024 that have any relationship to software instance. I'm going to edit this, and you'll begin to see some of the power of the visual query builder. I might not necessarily want any relationship between host and software instance, because if you know the discovery data model, there are quite a few. We presented the most commonly used one, so it could be just any relationship, or most likely what I'm going to choose is for software instances that are running on this host. That's most likely. Before I select that, you'll notice that it says showing 2 of 9. If I press show all, there are quite a few ways between which there are quite a few relationship types between host and software instance. Some of them are fairly esoteric. For example, I might have software instances that are managing this host. So for example, you can have, I think a good example of that would be virtual center software instances can be used to manage other hosts. And so there might be a relationship of this type between a software instance that manages an ESX server, for example. But I don't care about those now. I would like to look for the most common one, which is software instances running on this host. So I've refined the condition already to hosts that have hosted software on them. And as I said before, I'm particularly keen on Tomcat. So now I'm going to add a condition not only on the host, but on the related software instances as well. So I'm going to say that I'm looking for software instances that contain the word Tomcat in their type. So if I apply that, so now my graph condition is hosts that are Windows, more than 1024 of RAM, that are hosting software of type Tomcat, or where Tomcat is in the type. If I run this query now, I've gone down from 131 hosts down to 15. So of those 131 hosts, only 15 of them are actually running Tomcat. Let's confirm that, for example. We're looking at a list of hosts here still. And if I click through to one of these hosts, hopefully I will be able to show you that if I go down, if I click through to the software instances, indeed, there is a Tomcat application server there. So I've defined the condition now to limit the number of hosts just down to 15 now, where they're running Tomcat. So I'm going to pause a little bit and draw your attention to this green circle around the hosts. When I ran that query, I got a list of hosts, but perhaps I would want a list of software instances. So now if I click on the software instance icon, the green circle moves over here. This is what we call the root of the query. This is the node kind that will be returned when I press run. So now when I press run, I get a different result. I get a list of software instances, and there are 27 of them. So across those 15 hosts, there are 27 separate instances of Tomcat running. So that's one to draw just to highlight that the green circle instructs the system which kind of node you want the query to return. I'm going to set it back to hosts now. Now, when I run the search for hosts, I got the default summary view for hosts. I might want to control what data I want to return from my query. So now I'm going to select this icon here, which is to add or modify the columns that are displayed in the results. When I do so, I'm presented with a slightly different dialog. It's adjacent to the filter dialog. You can flip between them directly if you want. And it shows here that currently it's showing the default summary for hosts. I want to change that. Instead of that, I would like to show, let's say, I would like to show the name of the system. I was filtering on OS type, so I'll include that as well. And logical RAM. So that I was filtering on those, but let's add those to the display. Now, not only does it show the filter condition, it shows the columns we're going to show. When I run that, you can see that I now show those columns: name, OS type, logical RAM. So far, so good. Okay, but I'm trying to understand Tomcat. So let's add another column. So instead of showing an attribute of the host, I would also like to show properties of the related software instances. So now I'm going to select some attributes from the related software instance in this result set. And I'm going to show, for argument's sake, I want to show the name, just to illustrate a point. So now you can see that I'm going to show from the host its name, OS type, and logical RAM. From the software instance, I'm showing name. Now when I run the query, the columns are changed again. And I can see a long list of Tomcat software instances on that host. A bit messy, so I'm going to choose a slightly different view. Firstly, I'm going to edit the columns, and I don't actually want the name, so let's remove that. Instead of that, let's one of the things you might want to do is you might want to show not just the list of all the names, but a count of the software instances. So there's a meta attribute here, which is software instance count. So if I select that and apply, and I run the query again, my third column is now a count of those software instances. Maybe I want to change the column name here. That's I might want to. I don't like it calling it software instance count. I might want to call it something different. So if we go in, I have the opportunity to rename what this column is called. So I might say count of SIs. That's what I'd like to say. So I save that, count of SIs, run the query, and it now says count of SIs in the top of the column. Okay. So let's go back to my query again. Tomcat, you may know, in our data model is a software instance, but it can sometimes have another node kind that's related to it, which is a software component. So if I search for software component, here we go. Now my query is restricted to hosts that have software, that have Tomcat software running on them, and those Tomcat software instances have related software components. Now, remember I got 15 hosts last time. Now that I've added the requirement that there must be a software component related to those software instances, if I run the query here, I'm getting 10. So only 10 of those 15 software instances, hosts with software instances also have software components related to them. But maybe that's a bit too specific. Maybe I don't really want to restrict it. There is an option therefore I could just not include the software component at all, but maybe I do, but I can mark it as optional. Now you'll see that the circle here changes from a solid gray line to a hashed gray line. The implication here is that it doesn't have to have a software component related to it. So if I run the query now, I should be back to 15 again. I can add another column. Hopefully I'm still audible. Yes.
You did, yes, you did disappear for a little bit.
Okay, so I lost my interconnection a little bit, but it's allowed me to allow you to show one feature in the system, which is much like the user query section that you have already. We remember the queries that you've been running, and you can click on one of these links down here to repopulate the query that I was building. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add another column, not related to the software instances, but related to the software components, and I'm going to show their count. And when I run the results, when I run the query now, you can see that there are several that have 0 software components, and there'll be 5 rows that have 0 there. Going back. So that's now optional. And then lastly, I'm going to do one last qualification to my graph query. Let's imagine that for some unknown reason, if you're running Tomcat on a Windows server where there is more than 1024 of logical RAM on the system, and you haven't got a particular patch loaded onto your Windows system, then there's a problem. So now I'm going to add another criteria, which is another node kind. I'm going to look for patch. So I'm looking for patch nodes now, and I want to filter that to a particular patch. And I'm going to filter on a patch that I'm not entirely sure what the patch is, but it doesn't really matter. I'm going to look for this particular patch and apply that, because I want to draw your attention to something that people want to do with their queries that is quite powerful with this relationship editor. Before I edit the relationship, this is getting a little bit cluttered, perhaps, so it's all compact on one side. So I'm going to try and clean up the view a little bit. I'm going to move that to the left, just to make it fit more nicely within my window. I've moved this patch node in this graph condition to the left. It has not changed the condition or the query in any way. It's purely a presentational thing, just to make the layout easier for me to see. So now this host can, this is looking for any of these Windows hosts that have this patch installed. Now, if I run that query now, my 15 hosts go down to 9, because only 9 of those 15 hosts actually have that patch installed. But I don't want to find the ones with the patch. I want to find the ones without the patch. And this is something that is quite difficult to do, or you need to know quite a little bit of how the search query language works in order to do this. But here it's quite easy. If I edit the relationship, I can simply say that patches, the count of patches I want to find, I want to be exactly 0. So now if I apply this filter, before I run it, you'll notice that on the left-hand side of this line, it says the little word 0 here, and that's implying that the query is saying that there must be 0 patches with that name related to the Windows hosts that have Tomcat, that have software components, and so on. Now, if I run it, instead of 9 hosts that did have the patch, I find 6 hosts that do not, that have the conditions, meet the conditions I wanted. And so that is a somewhat contrived example, you might say, for why would I want to be finding hosts that are Windows based with a greater than 1024 amount of RAM that are running Tomcat that don't have a patch. But all of it is artificial, really, is to allow me to show off what you can do with the Visual Query Builder. I haven't shown necessarily all of the capabilities here, but the most likely to be used ones. I'm now going to transition back to the slides, and just to wrap up the presentation bit before we then open up for some Q&A. So let me start the sharing back to my PowerPoint. Has that worked, Sam?
Yes, it is. Great.
Perfect. Okay, so that was the demo. Some of the things you just saw, there are some development in progress right now for some extensions to those capabilities. In SaaS, if you're a SaaS customer, you'll begin to see these over the coming months. For an on-prem customers, you'll see them in subsequent on-prem roll-ups of those features. You saw me adding columns to be displayed for my hosts. And you also saw me then transition over to showing software instances at one point rather than hosts. Now, at that point, when I transitioned to the software instances, I was showing the default summary view for software instances. But if I've spent the time to build up the set of columns on the hosts, and then I decide, actually, I want to show software instances, we are building a feature that allows you to copy the columns from one node kind and paste them onto another node kind. And then behind the scenes, the product will adjust them so that they do the right thing, rooted on that particular root node. If you understand the real depths of how discovery works, you will know that relationships inside our graph model themselves can have attributes, and there are some use cases where you would need to access those attributes. And so we're adding the ability in the future to allow you to, on the relationship filter, also specify attribute filters for it. Some of the canned reports that you might use in the product, you will see allow you to pass in a parameter before they run. And that's also something we'd like to add to the Visual Query Builder. So you can build a parameterized visual query and then run it. And lastly, we want to be able to, a logical next step would be to visualize the results of what you find, but only visualizing the things that match the query, not the general query, not the general visualizations, only showing the things that match the visualization. It occurred to me now that since I've gone away from the browser, I forgot to mention that all of those visual queries that you build can then be saved and shared, just like you can with generic queries. And with that, I want to summarize what we've talked about. I've taken you through a worked example of adding nodes to a visual query. We built up a graph condition with multiple matching criteria, including multiple node kinds. We filtered based on attributes. We selected specific relationship types. We had marked nodes as optional or not. We configured which columns we wanted to see in the results that we got. We changed which node kind we wanted in those results. We explored the possibilities of tweaking the relationship cardinality between those nodes. And then we saved those visual queries in the system. In the documentation, you'll see, which I'll link to in a moment, there are some more detail about all of these capabilities. But as a reminder, I was modifying filters, I was selecting columns, I was relating node kinds, and I was adding some when I moved things to the left or I did things over there. And on the relationship side, You can edit relationships by selecting this menu item, and on the left and right end of those lines, it gives you information about the node counts that the cardinality that you're exploring. There are some links in this PowerPoint which will be shared afterwards, so don't worry about trying to note these down. We've got links to the documentation about the Visual Query Builder itself. If you want to understand the discovery data model in more depth, then that's also documented, as well as the query language. So if you want to go beyond the Visual Query Builder and into the actual search language, then that is also included. And with that, Sam, we can transition to the Q&A.
Great. I'm just going to need a couple of seconds or so to give everyone access to be able to speak. But while I do that, we have got a couple of questions. So Duncan, do you want to just take that question that's come from anonymous attendee around the resulting query, and then we can go to Michael's and Richard's after?
Sure, that makes sense. I was just started typing a reply, but I might as well type. So it might be useful, Andy, if you go back to the demo, because it'd be easy to see it. That
yeah.
So the question was, can we see the resulting query? And the answer is yes. If Andy gets there. So one of the other things that Andy, there's a future thing that hasn't come yet, but it's an obvious place that we're going to, is that people who use the product will be used to the idea that we have an existing query builder, which is a refinement query builder. In the sense, you run your query and then you can refine the results. Part of that allows you to see the query. So Andy's just run this thing. If he goes to the customize button, then you can see there's a raw query tab, and that is now quite long because it's done a fairly complicated thing. And this is the point of this feature, is that visually it's been able to make a pretty tricky kind of a condition. But you can see here, if you know the search language, you can see what it's done. You can cut and paste that into the generic query and edit it if you wish. Something that does not exist yet is that this customize is the kind of previous generation of a query builder, which lets you do some fairly similar jobs to refine the results you're getting. So to change the columns you've got, to modify, or to further refine it, to add additional conditions to it. So this hasn't gone away. This is still here. There's a medium-term plan to modernize this part of the user interface to make it more in keeping with the thing Andy's been showing. So at the moment, there's kind of two ways of thinking about queries. You've got the building it in the first place, and then you've got later you can refine it, and they're slightly different from each other. That there will come a time when they're more unified together in terms of this one will visually be more like the other one. But at the moment, you can see the query here, and you can further refine it.
Thank you, Duncan. If you can obviously later summarize that, just so we've got that captured as a question. So the next one came from Michael. I can see you're still on, Michael. Do you want to come off mute and ask your question that's in the chat? Just going to see if he can unmute. I have unmuted everyone now. Hey, Michael, can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All
Hello.
right. So my question is this, because I can see the power of Visual Query Builder about BMC discovered data. But what about those reports that you may be providing to leadership? So for instance, suppose I use BMC Discovery's, Query Builder to generate a report similar to our demo, like all Windows servers with a specific patch with memory of 1024, because we know there's a vulnerability. But I need to provide that information segmented by owner or director. So I would like to go out to a PeopleSoft report. Maybe it's published every week in a CSV format. Pull that in and merge that information so I can go to senior leadership and say, Bob has 12 of those, Sally has 13, Michael has 4. Is that possible with the Visual Query Builder?
So natively in the Visual Query Builder, the answer to that is no. But when you say that you have that data, that ownership information, it may not be the case for you, but some customers have chosen to contrive to have that data be brought into Discovery. So people have built integrations into third-party databases and so on to extract some of that ownership information, for example. So So actually importing two sets of data and merging them in Discovery, that's not what Discovery is. The visual query builder is not, that's not what it's for. It's for querying on data in Discovery. But if by means of integrating via data sources or other means you can contrive to have that data exist in Discovery, then you could access it via this same query builder. So say, for example, we have a bunch of categories that are around context and metadata. So for example, we have a concept of organizational unit, for argument's sake. If I add that in there, and then I changed my column display to include also, for example, the organizational unit name. By the way, I have no idea whether this data has that in here. So this is a bit of a live demo. I don't know whether this data exists in the system, but let's have a look. If I run that now, do I have any data in here that? No, I actually, what have I not? Oh, there's none. There aren't any related organizational units for those hosts. But you see where I'm going with this is that if the data, if that was related to organizational unit, then it would show it. As an example of that, instead of doing organizational unit, I know that I do have some location information in here. So let me search for location. If I search for location, and I want to choose hosts that are in this location of this host, and apply and run that now. Actually, I've got two node kinds there. I only want one. Take out organizational unit. So now if I run this, I don't, what did I not add? Oh, I didn't add the column. Sorry, I didn't add the column. So now I want to add the column to location name, like that. So now if I run the query now, these are in the locations they're in. So that's not exactly what you were asking, Michael. So natively, can I take Discovery's data and merge it inside Discovery with the data that's in Discovery? No. But customers sometimes contrive to have that data be pulled in via means of integration.
Well, the CIs that we have in our organization do have as a required field the owned by group, okay? But what I'd like to do is take all these owned by groups and data and be able to roll that up to, say, maybe the vice president level or to the director level. Now, that organizational information is kept in PeopleSoft.
Yeah.
Now, I get a CSV file out of that once a week, you know, it does change. I was just wanting to take the information that might be in BMC, merge it with the stuff coming from PeopleSoft, and give it an organizational view of vulnerabilities, costs, whatever the case might be that you're using the query language for.
It makes total sense. I think for some of those expanded use cases, it might be worth looking into whether some of the Helix dashboard capabilities can encompass that. I'm personally not able to know for sure whether that's possible, but I understand the use case. It makes total sense.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Next question came from Richard. Is there going to be similar functionality added to the asset console? This empowers our analysts to do more. Richard, do you want to also come off mute?
Oh, yes. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Hello.
Excellent. Yeah, so we try and, you know, we have a lot of empowered analysts, is what the way we like to term it, where we allow them to do a certain amount of investigation before they pass that ticket on. So being able to do better querying in the asset console, so not necessarily at this level, but, you know, the host operating system, that sort of stuff is really useful, but none of that seems to exist in the asset console. It's really restrictive in once you've synced this data into the CMDB and try and use it in the asset console, it seems really restricted in what you can actually see and view. It's whether there's any plans to sort of expand that and make it more user-friendly, more like this, in fact.
As a reasonable question, I will have to defer to my colleagues in the CMDB organization. We can work with, so on the call today we have Brian Kaplan, who is a product manager for BMC Helix Discovery. He has opposite numbers in the CMDB side of the world, and we can certainly take that feedback to that organization and understand what plans they may have to make similar enhancements to their user experience.
Yeah, or as you just mentioned, in dashboards, because dashboards, is great for reporting, but it doesn't do this very well for CMDB stuff. So maybe there's a better way for us to empower analysts to do that stuff without having to give them access to discovery, which is sort of a step too far.
Understood. I'd always encourage people to have access to discovery if you trust them, but no, I take your point.
So just to add to that about discovery, that I completely agree with the use case around making use of the data that has ended up in ITSM asset that you may wish to do a similar approach, and we say that's a feature request for that part of the ecosystem. But it's also true that discovery always has a massive wealth of information that does not get synchronized into the CMDB, because there's to echo a question that's come from Andreas around technical data in terms of data that reflect how the data was discovered. So Andy's been showing what we call the inferred data, so hosts and software instances and software components. This is discovery's interpretation of what the world is like. But as you know, if you're experienced with discovery, there's also a wealth of data around what we call the directly discovered data, which is the mechanics of how discovery was collected, also all of the low-level data in terms of process lists that were collected, files that were collected, commands that were executed. And all of that data is available to the query builder as well. And so that kind of mining of the discovery details will only ever make sense in discovery, because it's only discovery that retains that information. So here you can see that literally all of the data, every last bit of information that is available in discovery is available to the query builder.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you.
Duncan, just obviously on the note of Andreas, I can see he's also on. So Andreas, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to your question that links quite nicely.
No, it's all right. Thank you for answering
Okay.
that, because yes, that's what I was looking for, and I see that it's available. So really nice.
Just to expand on that question, so the query builder is around providing a more user-friendly access to the information that is there. Now, it doesn't provide access to information that is not there, and so there's also, it's kind of a slightly separate topic around understanding of usage of certain credentials. Have they worked? Have they failed? Some of that is possible with any kind of query approach, whether you use the new query builder or the existing query language. Other kinds of questions, some of them, then it might be a challenge to answer some of those questions, and that becomes then a request to extend the data that's available to this system. So can you solve every last question you might wish to do? Well, no, but if the data is there to answer your question, then yes, you can use this feature to do that.
Thank you. So we'll move to the next question. Jose had a question. Is there a function that for the end user is very interesting, since query language, it is not very friendly or easy for users with little experience of discovery? Jose, do you want to come off mute and just talk through your experience? I don't know if you're still here. I think he may have left. I don't know if you want to summarize that. We can take that offline, or whether you want to just follow up on that, Duncan.
To me, that reads as a comment rather than a question. It's
Yeah.
a comment that, well, this is neat, and yes, we agree that it's useful.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think he's dropped now, but yeah, more commentary. Okay.
Maurizio just raised his hand.
Yes, and it's disappeared. The hand has gone down.
Oh.
I don't know if okay. So there isn't any more questions at the moment. We'll open up the opportunity. Actually, another hand raise has come back. If anyone does have any questions, feel free to put it into the Q&A section. Otherwise, raise your hand and we'll take your next question. And I think, Eric, you just raised your hand. Do you want to come off mute? And hello?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Hello.
Perfect. Yeah, so I had a question. This was a reference to part of the conversation. I put a question in about, running the query and then seeing the raw query. And there was, I think, either Duncan or Andy, you had mentioned that there would also be some forthcoming updates to the actual customized query screen. And the reason I ask is it looks like here that the visual query is actually factoring in the updates and re-establishing the query. Whereas if you go into the existing customized query, sometimes you can get some kind of chained post-processing results that may do like a numerical pointer to an attribute. And sometimes that works. And sometimes, you know, there will be a challenge of, hey, I don't know which attribute you're referencing. So was just curious if some of the updates to the customized query page would factor in or behave more like this, where it looks like it's redefining the query on the fly and not necessarily chaining together some post-processing.
That's an excellent question. Maybe I'll try and answer that. But
Yeah,
so yes, you're quite right that this current feature, it's building the query right from scratch. So it knows what it's doing because it's building the query from scratch. So it's never the case that it finds itself with a query that has happened so far that it does not understand because it's building it entirely itself. The existing refinement query builder, that finds itself with a query that came from an arbitrary thing. And as Andy said right at the start, the query language is a very powerful thing, and you can type stuff in, and it's nearly a full-featured programming language. And so you can do things in your query that you can't build with the query builder. That it's just inevitable that although this graphical query builder is very powerful, the refinement query builder is pretty powerful. There are things that you can do in the query language that you simply can't do graphically. So the refinement query, its hands are slightly tied in the sense that it does not necessarily know where the query came from. And so sometimes it's able to refine it in the sense that, as you say, there's a clause in the language called process with, which basically means I don't care how I got to this stage, but given that I'm here, these are the additional refinements to do. And so the new query builder is never in that circumstance. It always knows where it came from. Once we enhance the refinement, we are going to be able to make it so that quite often, much more often than in the current world, it will be able to take your query and turn it into a graph form that then you can edit. But there will in fact still be some circumstances where you did something in your initial query that is not possible to do graphically. And therefore it will end up basically in this sort of a view. You'd have a black box in the sense that it would basically say query so far, and it can't render that graphically because you just can't, as in it's not that we're not clever enough, it's just it can't be done. And so it should become better in the future, but there will still definitely be cases where the only thing you can do is you take a complex thing and then you add the refinement on at the end. Did that make sense?
It does. It makes sense. A follow-up question then is, if we define a visual query, execute it, and then do filtering from the results, if we then go and save that query, is it going to kick it out of being a visual query?
It will, yes.
Okay.
In fact, well, actually, no, neither, because in fact you can't save. The only way to save a query, having refined it, you can't save it. But you can. The only thing you can do is you can take the
Go back
text
to
of
it.
the raw query and go back to the generic query. And if you type the text in, well, now it's text. The system doesn't know that it came. So even if you take literally the text it generated and paste it into, so if you take this and paste it into the generic query, well, it's now just a generic query. It doesn't know that, oh, that's one that I built in the first place. So the same thing will work now, but now if you save it, that's now, it's not a visual query anymore. So it doesn't know that that's where it came from.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
Thank
that's you're right. There is a save there. To save it, it saves it as a generic query. So yeah, you can't get back to the graphical query. I think that was it.
Whilst we're here, I realised I didn't actually show this in the demo that I ran. Sorry, am I still there? My internet connection is a bit unstable.
Yeah, that's fine.
My browser's gone a bit funny. I don't know why. My browser went a bit funny. But if we go back to the visual query, I mentioned this in passing. But if I go back to my query, if I now save it, saved it in user queries, much like the other ones. And you can see I've got them here. There's some slight modifications to the actions you can take on these saved queries. Previously, you could only really click through to them. Now you can choose to edit the one that you've currently got. So if I edit this saved one now, it'll take me back into the visual query that I was previously editing, and then I can edit it and save it. Alternatively, I could, instead of editing the saved version, I could copy and edit. So edit a new version, a new copy of that. So again, it takes me back into the visual query builder now, but then when I save it, I would save a new copy of that, a modified copy of that. I realized I didn't include that in the demo earlier. Okay. Any other questions?
No, we don't have anything else in the Q&A. Does anyone else have questions that they want to ask? Because we've got roughly 9 or so minutes. We can finish early, but I want to give people the opportunity if they have questions to ask them. Hello, Matt.
Good afternoon, good day all. Can we share these between users?
Yes.
The visualizers.
Yes. So if I go to user, if I go to my user queries, it's in the list here. So I could now say I can mark that. I could share it, and then that would appear in the shared queries for other users as well.
As a visualizer query.
Yes.
Marvelous. Thank you.
Maurizio has raised his hand.
Yes, hello, Maurizio.
Hi, how are you?
Hello.
Just a curiosity, is possible to use the exploder or processing into the visual query?
So the question is, can you use explode or process with, for example, in visual?
Yes,
That's what you're asking. Right now, that is not currently possible. No. The only computed values that you can currently show are the ones I demonstrated here, which is the count of related nodes. But things like explode and process with, if you're working in queries to that level, I think you're probably going to continue with the textual query language.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just as a general point there, that any individual, that there are not everything that can be done with the query language can be done with the visual format, and it's impossible to imagine that there will never be a visual format that can do everything, because, well, it's pretty much a full programming language. There's all sorts of things you can do in the query language that you'll never be able to do visually. So certain individual features perhaps will come along. So the things you mentioned may come in future, but it's not an aim of this to allow you to visually do every last thing that you can do with the query language. There will always be some things that it just makes more sense to say that you have to use the query language for that.
Madhu also has a hand.
Yeah. Hello, Madhu.
Hi, all of you. Good that there is a nice interface introduced. Actually, we have been struggling a lot of queries since past versions, but this is so good that like blueprints, I can see the cases now. My question is this means I understand correctly or not? When he explained, is it for only for SaaS? Is it not available for on-prem, or will it be available soon?
This is available for on-prem as of 24.1.
Excellent. And then the visualization is so good that this query language, I think, can be used for application modeling, right? If I remember right. No.
So that's not currently possible, but I can understand why you've asked that question. That we have a longer, obviously all of our modeling capabilities are going to evolve over time, and we would see techniques converging and user experience converging ultimately.
Okay, because the GUI interface so good that the application modeling compared to application modeling, this is the best one, because I can see the filters and the queries and everything drag and drop wise. So if the application modeling also in the same wise, it would be great, because it simplifies the application modeling for a SAM kind of things actually. But anyways, thank you very much for information. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you for the comment and for the feedback.
Thank you. Okay. No further questions in the Q&A. 5 minutes left. So whilst everyone decide if they want to ask a question, just a reminder that this is getting recorded, so I will send this out, this recording. I'll work with the team of panelists today to get all of the questions that have been answered into a blog post, and we will share everything to you on email. We do also have another session that's being run around tomorrow for discovery, which is administration best practices. This is being run from support. So if you haven't already seen that, I will get that reminder out. Please feel free to join. And we've got a couple more discovery webinars that are coming up. And hopefully, I know I've been talking to the panel today to get some more content out. So if there are anything that we haven't shared over the last coming months or even last year's webinars that are of interest, feel free to just take 5 minutes to fill in the survey that will come out on the thank you email, and we'll look to try and create more content. So I think it's a good point to end it. Andy, thank you very much for presenting this for the customers. Thank you, Duncan, and also to Brian, who's joined as well. He's one of our new product managers that's just started. So again, we've got a bigger team now. If there are any questions or you want connections with the team, please reach out, and we'll do our best and hopefully see you on tomorrow's session or over the next coming months.